Hello and welcome to the 795th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to students joining us virtually from the CUNY Graduate Center and Mercy University, as well as to members of the 2025 class of fellows, a select group of diverse rising next-gen business thought leaders joining us today. The Economic Club of New York is proud to stand as the nation's leading nonpartisan platform for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. We've been doing this for more than a century, and we have certainly been proud to be a platform for thought leadership and dialogue in a very nonpartisan, non-political way. Today, we're privileged to continue that tradition and welcome back our distinguished guest, Bill Gates. Bill's the co-chair of the Gates Foundation, where he helps shape strategies to advance health, education, and economic equity. He co-founded Microsoft in 1975, leading it to become a global leader in software and technology. In 2008, he transitioned to full-time philanthropy, focusing on global health initiatives, clean energy innovation, and education through the Gates Foundation, Gates Ventures, and Breakthrough Energy. He's also a co-founder of the Giving Pledge, encouraging the world's wealthiest individuals to commit a significant portion of their wealth to philanthropy. Bill continues to advocate for scientific innovation and collaboration to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. Today, as part of the club's author series, we're excited to explore Bill's latest book, Source Code, My Beginnings. In a fireside chat, we're honored to have Ignatius, I know the name well, Ignatius, editor-in-chief of Harvard Business Review, as our moderator. Source Code shot to the top of the New York Times bestseller list on its first week out. All the proceeds will be donated to the nonprofit United Way Worldwide, which holds special meeting to Bill and his mother, Mary Gates. For more than a decade, Mary was a committed United Way volunteer who served as a board member of United Way of King County in Seattle and United Way International. It's also the first in a series of 3 memoirs that we understand Bill will write. The second will be focused on Microsoft, the third centered on the Gates Foundation and beyond. As a reminder, this discussion is on the record. We do have frankly, a lot of media on the line, and we're going to end promptly at 1:15. So without further ado, I'm happy to pass the mic over to you, Addie, and Bill.
Thank you, Barbara. Bill, it's nice to see you again. The book is really interesting. It's very humanizing. There's a lot to talk about your life, about the book. We have some questions that were pre-submitted by members of the Economic Club. I want to get to those later. But in this conversation, I want to start with the book, and then we have to move on to a few general questions about the state of the world, about the state of vaccines in the world. So I do want to get to that later, if that's okay with you.
Great.
All right, so let's talk about the book. There's always the question, why write a memoir? Possible answers are legacy, vanity, settling scores. What made you want to chronicle your early life?
Well, I suppose that you get a mix of motivations. I'm not that prone to looking back because, the idea of moving forward as fast as I can, staying ahead of the competition, being at the state of the art has kind of driven me. And yet, as I was turning 70, Microsoft turning 50, the foundation turning 25, my dad would be 100. I decided, sharing some of the thoughts about how things came together, the luck, the amazing role that people in my life have played, starting with my mother and father, but for this first part of my life, 2 key friends, Paul and Kent. And I decided, it'd be fun to really dig into all the archives I could find and, go through the narrative of how I ended up starting Microsoft at a very young age, and what went into that.
So I want to come back to some of those key figures, obviously, but I still want to talk a little bit about the process. Was this a matter of getting on the record thoughts and insights that you already knew, or was there intentional element of self-discovery to unlock understanding about yourself, about the past, about the path?
Well, you definitely learn as you go through this. You get, I spent a lot of time with my sisters in terms of their recollections and how that squared with mine. I actually, got all my report cards and teachers' comments and, various things I went through at Harvard, including one disciplinary thing. So I saw a lot that I hadn't seen before. And, I got to, think about how lucky I was. I'd say, I come out of that with that rising to the top of the list, to have the parents I did, to be born when I was, to go to this private school that happened to give me exposure to computers, to have the friends I did. It's a pretty idyllic childhood. I didn't have, other than the tragic death of one of those friends, I didn't have anything that was negative. My dad was quite successful. My mom was quite energetic, and she had high expectations, which was a source of some conflict between us. But the number of things that came together for me is pretty unbelievable.
Um, Again, I come back to the word humanizing that I use at the top, and I do think that's a important and successful characteristic of the book. You describe yourself as a young man, as a child, as brilliant but tempestuous. Distracted at school, indifferent, weird, I think. There's a quote where you say, "I felt most at home in my own head." So my question is, what is your advice to parents, and there must be many in the audience, who have a kid who displays these characteristics and maybe isn't sure, is this a good thing? Is this a troubling thing?
Well, certainly my social skills were very slow to develop, and I not natural at those things. And I posed a real challenge to my parents, not only because I pushed back on them, but because I seemed to have talent, and yet it was a long time before I was kind of applying that talent. I had this notion that you know, getting by with the minimal activity, that there was some merit in that, and they kept trying to change that. But they ended up doing things, that I'd recommend to everyone. They gave me a surprising amount of freedom, which nowadays would be pretty rare. That whether it was my Boy Scout hikes or various trips, they let me live in DC for a summer and be a page in the Congress. So they let me go out and do a lot of things. They sent me to this school that worked out very well, and they actually had me go to a therapist, which in those days was very unheard of. In fact, the therapist's other customers were all couples who were arguing with each other. I was the only, child who was seeking advice on how to fight with my parents.
So I'm interested, okay, so you talked about the freedom that they gave you, and as I read the book, I thought about my childhood and the freedom that, I felt I had. And, things are different today, and I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts more on that. Is that level of freedom, was that like clearly a good thing? And if we've lost that, how do we get it back?
Well, there's an interesting observation a number of books have made that, we're probably confining kids, particularly boys, more in the physical world than we should, and, probably not watching over and setting limits in terms of their digital activities. And, going out on those hikes with different friends, being part of different friend groups who could see me in different ways, church, school, Boy Scouts, neighborhood. I think that was very beneficial to me. Slowly but surely, I was able to have, close friendships with boys my age. I got exposed to a lot of adults. My parents always had people coming by the house, and So asking them questions and hearing about the things they were doing, I was a bit precocious in terms of my curiosity about work and business. And they encouraged that, what really got me thinking at a young age.
Yeah. Um, you also write that if you were growing up today, you would probably be diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Um, I'm really interested in your thoughts on that. When you came to that self-realization or maybe self-diagnosis, and what the value or the power of a label, or a specific kind of diagnosis might be for an individual, and would have, might have been for you.
Well, even today, when you get a diagnosis like that, they don't have, some pill that you take and boom. And I wouldn't take it anyway because the, benefits I get from hyperfocus, outweigh and have outweighed throughout my life any of the, limitations of socialization or even, things I have, I rock when I'm thinking and, I don't even realize I'm doing it. It kind of bothers people. And maybe I was in my 30s giving a speech at Cambridge University when I was first asked this question. And it took me aback a bit. But then I thought, well, wait a minute, I don't want to act like that's some pejorative. And I do have quite unusual characteristics. And over time, I'd say it's pretty clear it's in the family of, Asperger's autism, just, to go in my room and read, you know, uh, at such great length and very different than my peers. And eventually I got so I could apply that to my studies and eventually to my work at Microsoft.
When you read a memoir about, by somebody who is, successful, you can't help as you read say, okay, now at what point did this unformed person become, the Bill Gates that we know and that we have admired. I remember reading a biography of the Beatles where, the first chapter was exactly that, the moment when they became the Beatles. It's sort of fun to identify that. In your memoir, there I think there's a moment, you talk about playing cards with your grandmother and realizing, I can figure this out, and that maybe you drop that as a sort of, for people like me or like yourself, trying to figure out, all right, how did I kind of become the person? Because we have these talents and maybe assume, well, everybody has them. And then there's a realization, well, maybe not everybody has them. So, as you think about, at what point did you become the person who would have the intelligence, precociousness, audacity, foresight to create what would become Microsoft?
Well, certainly by the end of this book, when I'm, 25 and Microsoft's about 3 years old and we're moving up to Microsoft, although we only have like 20 employees, the things that I like to do, which were math and then programming as I got exposed to that, and the understanding that these miraculous chips would make computing go from being this super expensive thing to almost be free. And the fact that, I understood the piece of that would be critical, the software piece, because I'd had thousands of hours of different projects where I, was able to say, oh, I'm getting better at programming. And then I was exposed to other people would say, no, you can be even better. And, when you're 13 to 18 and people are challenging you that way, I was just very intense about how do you write great software. And so it's almost, this amazing thing that the digital age where software would become so important, I, saw that and, understood that, and my parents backed me enough and gave me enough self-confidence that the idea of dropping out and starting a company and hiring a bunch of older people, I felt very comfortable doing that. So it's in high school as I'm meeting, my two best friends there, Kent and Paul, that's being shaped a sense of confidence, a desire to sort of be the best. And you're right, you could say that this idea that I saw my grandmother's mental state during the card game was superior to mine, and she wouldn't explain her algorithm to me. The term algorithm wouldn't have made any sense to me, but I said, wow, she's got a state machine. That all the cards that have gone by are creating a decision process for her about what to do. And why can't I do that? And eventually I was able to do it even slightly better than she did.
So I apologize for the dog barking in the background. This is such is life in the modern world. So in high school and college, you were finding computers wherever you could, right? Getting access to this is before PCs, to mainframes, spending countless hours of your free time engaged with them. I'm curious, what's the equivalent today? What are tomorrow's successful business people, running around spending their free time on now?
Well, I suppose the only thing that's scarce now is gigantic clusters that you can train or run big AI models on. So there's a lot of scientists at universities who are like, gosh, I have data, I have insights, but I don't have access to those tools. And so you have this incredible scramble today as the digital age moves from computation to sort of matching or exceeding human intelligence. And so, you're lucky if you get access to those things. But, it's hard to overstate how small the industry was in those early days. That, the computer business, okay, there was IBM and there were a bunch of small companies. But the people who saw the personal computer coming, was a few thousand people. I mean, we could get everyone together and, Steve Jobs would be there, I would be there. But, we were a very small band. Today, as you look at, okay, what's this next level of AI, you've got, millions of people all over the world. And so it's less of a band with a secret, than it is kind of a rush, almost a gold rush type atmosphere.
Yeah, I do want to come back to AI in a bit, because I think well, it's important, but still sort of staying at your childhood. I mean, one thing that you and I seem to have in common is that we both tried to be the class joker in high school. I don't know if the public always has a sense of that part of your personality. So I have to ask, are there, pranks you pulled that you can recall, or anything from those days?
Well, you got to enjoy what you're doing, especially if it's so intense, that you're staying up all night and you're getting a little giddy and you realize, okay, maybe I should get some sleep, but I want to get this one thing done. And, things that seem very, very funny after you've been up for a few days, when you come in the next day, you're like, hey, that's not funny. So we had a sense of joy of doing this stuff. In the class, it was, I have to say it was a bit sarcastic, that when they would, be really serious about something, how important something was, like, that we were really learning Spanish, which we really weren't learning Spanish. They would stick a TV up in front and nobody remembered, a damn thing. And I could make fun of that. I had a teacher who would spray her hair during class. And, so I wrote a paper about how I had changed it to be spray paint. And so without knowing, she was, coloring her hair and nobody was telling her that. Fortunately, she took that as a funny thing and, decided that that was okay. I always said to the teacher, you give grades, they gave like A, B, C, D, but they also gave a grade for effort, 1, 2, 3. And I always said to them, I want to get an A3. I want to get an A, but have put absolutely no effort into it. And they never would give me the A3 that I wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting, the desire to be the successful underachiever. So at what point did you, I assume you came to the realization at some point that that's not exactly the ideal state?
Yeah, being a procrastinator or joker, when I went to this private boys' school in seventh grade, when I was just turning 12, um, they didn't really appreciate a joker. They appreciated athletes, which I wasn't going to succeed there, and people who were very good students. So over a couple of years, I decided, okay, I'll, I'll be the best student. I'll, get straight A's and show people I can actually do this stuff. And so people were a little surprised that I switched from the lackadaisical to the, very intense. And, we were taking math tests at that time, and that was something I liked a lot and was fairly good at. And so my position in the school changed to be not studious to, the most studious. And, that felt comfortable in that high school, and that, that was good for me. I still believed a little bit in procrastination. Like, I would look like I wasn't taking my books home because I cheated and had a second set of books. And it was only really when I got started Microsoft that the idea, hey, in the world of business, you don't procrastinate. Nobody gives you credit for, appearing not to work hard. And so then I completely flipped. And actually my competitors found it intimidating how intense I was.
Um, so you stopped being a joker, but you were kind of a rule breaker. I mean, it seemed like to get things done and particularly get access to computers, I think in both high school and college, you broke the rules, bended the rules, and risked, getting in pretty deep trouble for that. Do you see yourself as a rebel and a rule breaker still? I mean, is that part of who you are and maybe why you've succeeded?
Well, I'm certainly a risk taker, and I'm willing to tolerate a very high level of risk to try and achieve things. And I do think that's a little bit nature. When I look at my different kids, they have a different mix. One's more of a risk taker than the other two. And so I do think that along, with my intellect and the exposures I had, that helps a lot. The only thing that scared me about starting Microsoft was when I was hiring these adults that I was worried, will I be able to pay their salary? And, am I being careful? Because some of our customers would thrive, some would go out of business. And I had seen the companies that I admired, Wayne Computer, which was this unbelievably innovative company, went bankrupt. And I was like, wow, just because you're good technically, your business can get sideways. So I was scared as heck that I wouldn't be able to pay those people. But otherwise, the idea that we might fail didn't deter me at all.
Yeah, interesting. Um, so in memoirs, the role of the parents, the relationship with the parents is always fascinating, and the degree to which authors can really be candid is a challenge. I have no idea if you left stuff out or not, but what's in there is that your relationship with your mother was intense, and as you said, as a result maybe of that conflict, you were in therapy at age 9. Talk a little bit more about your relationship with her. Did you reconcile all of these complex thoughts, and what's her enduring influence?
Well, she kind of ran the household, be up here, be dressed on time, you know, get good grades, and uh, we'd have other families over. And after they'd go home, she'd say things like, oh, they must be so disappointed, their daughter didn't go to college, or, various things that would show my mom's value system. And whenever my mom would set goals like that, I always had this conflict of, should I just not try at all and show I don't care, or should I try and succeed to such a degree that she'll say, okay, you've succeeded. I don't need to push you a lot. And I went back and forth on those things. Clearly when it came to school, I I said to my mom once, hey, you told me to go to Harvard. And she said, no, she'd never actually said that, which is true, but she had evinced a way of, of evaluating other families that, made her hierarchy quite clear to me. And I have to say, as I got older and Microsoft successful, she did back off a bit. And we could joke around, like, she'd say, oh, you never would have succeeded without me. And, you've got to have this. And, don't you need advice on that? And some of that she was saying kind of sincerely. And some of it, was a little bit just being humorous because I had, gotten to be quite independent. So that, intense relationship, is probably where I get my, motivation to, work as hard as I did and, sort of try to push the boundaries of how successful I could be.
It's amazing to read about your friendship with Paul Allen and Ken Evans, who you've already mentioned in high school, a partnership that would, eventually lead to, forming something that would become Microsoft. Precocious doesn't even begin to describe what you were doing. I think you said you weren't really scared or intimidated by what you were doing. That itself is sort of staggering. How in the world did you come together and have that level of confidence and focus and direction?
Well, it was amazing that when very young people have an insight, in this case, that these computers on a chip microprocessors by exponential improvement would completely change computing, and that we were like, why isn't everybody just stunned by this? Don't they see that it's the greatest change agent of the age is this move towards absolutely free computing? And once we, had that insight and a lot of self-confidence, whether justified or not, that we could act on it, it was amazing how open-minded people were. Because once you're not on the normal what people expect, they think you really, they're not even sure what you might know. And so we did get companies that we were going to license to who were like, wow, you guys are, kind of off the charts. I couldn't rent a car because I was too young, but people were fascinated that we seemed to have this insight. And so and we wanted to move at absolutely full speed. I wanted to hire as many people as I could and get out in front, but it was only constrained by that idea of I wanted to be able to pay everyone.
So preternaturally self-confident. On the other hand, you do mention that you, I think, still have the college anxiety dream that so many of us have, where, it's late in the semester, you're about to take the final exam, somehow it is not going to work and you're going to fail. What does your therapist say about that?
Well, I was pretty intense at Harvard. When I, in the first year, realized I wasn't the best math student there, that there were others that were better than me, which, hadn't been the case in my high school. Then I decided to do something where I would kind of ignore my classes until the very last minute. In fact, go attend other classes. And so this idea that those last 3 weeks that Harvard called reading period, I needed to actually get my act together and read the material, because I always took classes that you could get your entire grade just from the grade on the final. And so that was a bit daunting, that I'd go to the library and, study all day and, in most cases, with one exception, be able to pull that off. And so I pushed myself pretty hard. So the idea that fear that, okay, I messed up this time, the idea that keeps coming back isn't that surprising to me. It's that, I finally forgot to sign up, and, I don't even know where the class is, and it's just super embarrassing. I'm surprised how many other people have similar dreams.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not universal, but it is that there's some version of that seems to be very common for, I guess there's no anxiety like college anxiety, and that's how we deal with it. Do you have any regrets about dropping out? You dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft. It obviously worked out, so a simple answer would be no regrets. But maybe the answer is more complicated. Do you have any second thoughts about that?
Well, I loved my time at Harvard. They fed me every day. They gave me good grades. They provided people who would sit up all night with me and talk about whatever random baloney, we wanted to debate. I wasn't good at socializing with girls still, but I, was having a lot of fun. And I liked what I was learning. And, I still think what I learned, about economics or psychology, which were incredibly good courses, maybe not Greek literature, but maybe, all of that stuff was valuable to me, even as I went off to do something that, wasn't all that directly connected. I'm a student, to this day, I love learning new things and, taking courses online from great professors. And so I really missed, my friends, were still there. And, my dad was paying my tuition. So that was, a very sweet deal. I didn't even have to have a job or anything. And I had money from some of the software stuff I had done. So I was reluctant to drop out. And it was only because I wanted to be the first. I was worried somebody would get ahead of us, and we had to be the first, that it was compelling. And Paul Allen, who'd moved out to Boston to kind of bug me, when the very first kit computer gets announced, that's when he wins the argument, and I leave Harvard.
So you talked about your early awkwardness with girls. You talk in the book about, the ultimate bravery might have been admitting that your affinity for drinking Shirley Temples when your colleagues were, of age and drinking alcohol. But, so you've led what you call the, kind of a charmed life, but, coping with, real insecurities, maybe deficiencies on certain levels. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about, how you've tried to develop self-awareness about this balance of characteristics and how you've tried to kind of move forward and grow from it.
Well, certainly running Microsoft, I at first had these such simplistic notions that if you were smart, you could do sales and marketing. And, so I almost like mathematical smartness could be immediately applied to whatever area, which is sort of how I thought of myself. And that turned out to be such a bad idea that the people, it turns out there's actually a negative correlation between being very smart and being good at managing people. And so this idea that there are these multiple dimensions and I had to assemble a team and I had to have the respect for all the different skills on the team, that took me a decade to figure that out. I made some huge personnel mistakes. Of course, by the time Microsoft is growing, by the time it has 100 people, Steve Ballmer's come along and he's much more about, hiring and some of these people things. So, with his incredible help, we got to learn some of those things together and make mistakes. And, we did bring in, mature, smart people with great domain expertise and managed, to create a team around that. And of course, if some of your products are doing well, you can, try to do other products and sometimes mess things up. We tried to learn from other companies, although we thought of ourselves as unique. One of the most fun things was figuring out how to sell software around the globe. How do you sell in Japan and China and Germany? And, and so this was such a great time, but, we made a ton of mistakes. Fortunately, when you have a company, if you make mistakes, your products don't sell, your customers aren't happy. So if you allow it to work, there is a feedback loop that gets you back on track.
So I want to switch gears now and talk a little bit about the moment we're in politically and culturally. The announcement yesterday, the Trump administration apparently plans to stop financial support to Gavi, which for people who don't know, it's the organization that your foundation co-founded. that's helped purchase vaccines for kids in developing countries, and it seems to have done a lot of good. What is it that the president and his team don't understand about that effort?
Well, I'm going to do my best to make sure that the brilliant work the U.S. government has done in, keeping people alive and seeing pandemics early on so they can be stopped, before they come to the United States, all the work around HIV, vaccines, and polio, it's miraculous work. It's, not 1% of the budget. These are areas that I give billions of dollars of my own money to. And so I'm very careful to look at, we're saving lives for very small amounts of money. We're not, funding overhead or corruption. And so I do think in the next few months, as the Congress and executive branch look at this, that they will maintain that support. I mean, I'd go so far as to say that humanity's greatest achievement since the turn of the century is that we've gone from 10 million kids dying every year under the age of 5, now down to less than 5 million. And vaccines are the majority of that. There's a vaccine against diarrheal disease, a vaccine against lung infection, pneumococcus. These vaccines, it's incredible what's been done. And, these countries, have come to rely on the U.S. for these medicines. The polio eradication effort, they've also tentatively canceled that, which would mean an end to that effort. And I think that polio eradication, should be supported. If you cut off HIV medicines, mothers sadly infect their babies with HIV, and unless we get these services back up and running, there'll be literally millions of deaths. I'm not saying we can't make it more efficient in certain ways, more targeted. I'm not sticking up for every aid dollar, but everything in global health, that's my full-time work since 2008, and it's a miracle that people should hear about.
Yeah, I mean, look, the logic that you just laid out, I assume people in Washington are well aware of everything you just talked about, or aware of that argument. And, in past years, that would have won the day. Now you've got an administration that's skeptical. Well, that includes people who are skeptical about vaccines, who are skeptical about any kind of international assistance, who are skeptical about spending any kind of money on practically anything. So, I just the logic that you laid out, I don't even know if that's how one makes the argument now. I'm curious, how you think like a chess player. Like, so if people aren't listening to that, what are the other ways of trying to engage to save some of these things?
Well, they say that they want to maintain the life-saving programs, particularly where it strengthens our relationships with those countries, vis-a-vis China and others. And they say they, want to be able to stop pandemics, like Ebola and others. And, based on that, I'm very hopeful that this very tiny amount of money in the budget, that it should be maintained. It's great that at the start of this 4 years, the Congress, the executive branch, they're looking at things. And, when I saw President Trump, I said to him, hey, you're going to get rid of some things you should get rid of, and you might get rid of some things you shouldn't, and I'll, try and be someone, who's saying to you, how to be tasteful. There are things that accumulate over time that, are low impact. But I'll say this vaccine program, when you're saving 5 million lives a year and creating, a deep understanding that the U.S. is a moral country that cares, versus anyone else, I think that's very powerful.
So to what extent would you say we are or are not ready for the next pandemic?
Well, sadly, the pandemic really didn't bring us together the way that I expected it would. It's got, in that case, because some of the mandates did go on longer than they should have. When a new pandemic comes in, the risk is that it could be a pandemic that's far more fatal than COVID was. I mean, COVID in the end, it's tragic. Millions of Americans died, but not tens of millions. And so, we kind of geared up not knowing how bad it would be. And particularly as Omicron came along and we got the vaccine, which, President Trump did warp speed that contributed massively to that. We had gone, we kept some things longer than we should have. If you got a pandemic, say, this variant of flu that could cross over to human transmission, then you really would need to do some dramatic things. And so, I hope we're lucky and we get, another 10 years to get our act together for the next pandemic. There's only about a 15% chance that one would happen in the next 4 years.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's a high number or a small number, but that's a significant number, percentage. I did want to come back to AI. One of the members of the Economic Club had posed a question about DeepSeek, but so I'm interested in your take on what DeepSeek has shown us, but I'm also interested in your more general take, as generative AI takes hold, as, AGI is sort of in the offing, is this a moment to be a techno optimist or a techno pessimist, or does it depend on how things play out?
Well, there's both are correct. That is, if you think about, okay, we want a personal tutor that helps, a kid in the inner city be motivated to learn math. These AI tools are already, even in this early stage, helping out with that. As in New Jersey, seeing the Khan Academy work that our foundation supports, we're going to provide health advice to people, including in Africa, where there's an incredible shortage of doctors. We're going to make sure the poorest farmer in the world has the same type of advice from AI about when to plant, what to plant, that the richest farmer in the US has. So AI is going to solve a lot of problems. And there's books like, Reid Hoffman's Super Agency that are very good about that. But they're also going to change the environment in terms of the jobs and how we think of war or propaganda. And books like Mustafa Suleiman's The Coming Wave talk about that. So, almost every problem we have, AI can help us with, and then it will create some new and profound challenges of adjustment that we've never had before.
Yeah, and as I said, a member asked specifically about DeepSeek, which, seemed to have changed some of the thinking that successful, kind of large language model development, generative AI, was a matter of big expense and suddenly DeepSeek comes along, unclear exactly how much government support they have, but it seemed to be a game changer in terms of I don't know, the possibility for competition or early mover advantage. Were you moved by DeepSeek? Have you followed that, and are there lessons to take away from that?
Well, the speed of improvement in AI really blows the mind. I have a team that weekly looks and helps me see all these things, and I spend a few hours just trying things out, and not a week goes by that it's not amazing. DeepSeek was a profound improvement in efficiency. They published exactly how they did it. They had no Chinese government support. This is a completely independent group in China. Of the top 8 models in the world, 3 are Chinese, and who's actually number 1 changes. But DeepSeek for a month there, by most metrics, was the best in the world. So any nonsense that the Chinese are behind or we can stay ahead of China in this thing, I've always said that was nonsense, but now, people are being forced to admit that there is no, unique thing, because the understanding of how to advance and those good ideas, whether they come out of China or the US, are shared very globally. And so, we just have to say, AI is going to be everywhere. There's not going to be one country that has it. It's going to, and for education and health and even agriculture, that's a wonderful thing.
I lived in China, in Hong Kong and Beijing for a total of 15 years. So, I tend to advocate for, some sort of contact and interaction between, that smart people in the US and China need to be speaking to one another, or things could, get worse. Things are pretty bad right now. How serious do you think is the risk of a truly kind of parallel, not intersecting, development of technology in particular in China versus the West or versus the US? And, is that a concern, or, how do you see that playing out?
Well, if the US is very restrictive on certain things, then the Chinese chips and approaches will get adopted by these people we used to call allies, but now we call them other countries. And so, there is a great struggle that'll go on in terms of who will set the standards and whose technology will be the base of these things. Historically, the US had such a lead in almost everything, medicine, cultural things, everything to do with software, that, is almost the default case. But here, the US has to decide, because these are dual use technologies, they will find their way into military applications in every single country. And so that does make it a bit complex, that the most important technology for every human activity is one that's dual purpose. And it's amazing, but now, I was stunned how little AI was debated in the last election and policies around AI. I claim that by 2028, other than the economy, this will rise to the top of the list.
Yeah, it seemed like people talked a lot about the ethics of AI and to what extent we need to regulate it. I feel like that's happening in Europe. It's really not a conversation that's happening in the US, and I worry about that as well. So I want to come back to the book, in the remaining time we have, and, sort of more sort of summary thoughts. And I don't know if this is a silly question, but how does a kid become a Bill Gates? And that's, what to ultimately extract from the memoir, whether it's luck, and I think you mentioned that before, whether it's a product of mentorship, whether it's somewhat preordained given the talents and ambitions and drive that you had. What's your, headline take on that?
Well, I think whatever you really spend your time on between, say, age 13 and, 21, that if you have something that really is fun for you, whether it's design or art or sports, if you really, thrive on that and, dive into it, that in many domains is where you get world-class results, or, a skill that, can be a lifelong place to work and, get a lot from. It doesn't mean kids, when you're 21, if you haven't picked what you're going to do, that's a problem. But you could be lucky, like I was, and find something and use that, very plastic period, that you're kind of more open-minded. Somehow adults, particularly when it comes to new approaches, the young people often see it, push it in a way that, people who've been in the field for a long time tend to miss. So, I'd say there's a lot about when you're young, trying out those different things. If something is super fun for you, diving in on that. In my case, I was one of very, very few people who saw computing, which was this scarce, weird thing, and saw how it would change, this digital revolution would change humanity. You're not going to always have cases like that, but you can have a lot of fulfillment by being very, very good at what you do.
So, and the equivalent now might be AI, although, I'm a involved with a VC firm, and, we see these amazing startups, and you think, wow, I'd like to invest in that. But you also have the feeling, but maybe I could just sort of do that on my own with AI tools, in a day or a week or a month. So, what do you think? I mean, is AI the great source of the future Microsofts of the world, or is it a technology that will be hard to have moats around it as companies start up?
No, the question about whether there'll be moats is a fascinating one I think about a lot. In the digital revolution, we had the software piece that there were big moats, where you get Google and Microsoft and a number of companies. Some of the technologies like the optic fiber for communication or the disks that store unbelievable amounts of information, those were critical and very enabling, and brilliant work was done, but nobody ended up having a super valuable company. And so figuring out as a new technology comes along, as an investor, where profits will get generated and where things be commoditized, I'd say that's harder to make the judgment of that than ever, particularly when you have how many robotic companies are there? Well, there's about 20 good ones in South Korea. There's about 80 good ones in China. There's about 50 in Japan. How are they going to differentiate? People should think about that. But, at the same time, we know, just like the optic fiber and the disk storage, even if nobody makes any money, the impact on society will be profound. That's not at question.
So I'm curious, what's next for Bill Gates? As you said, you're around 70. Microsoft is in good hands. Other than, I think you said there are two more installments of the serial memoir. What else would you like to accomplish?
Well, the Gates Foundation, that has global health as our biggest thing, but also does education and agriculture work. That's my full-time work for the rest of my life. We have very ambitious goals, including, curing HIV. The polio fight is the big one right now, but once we get through that one, we'll go after malaria and measles eradication. There's new technologies that we fund that, give us a lot of hope in those things. And, I do think in the end, people do care about other people, even, in other countries. And so, I think over time, the values of the work we do will bring us a lot of fellow travelers, even if in the short run that's going down and not going up. So I love my foundation work. I don't work as hard as I did in my 20s. I play a lot of tennis and pickleball. I read a lot of books. I hang out. I have not only 3 amazing kids, but so far 2 grandchildren. So I'd say it's a wonderful time of life.
I think I saw on Twitter, on X, that you and Satya Nadella want to play each other in Krenis. Can you tell us what in the world that is?
Yeah, so I was over in India last week, all week, and the foundation does a lot of work there. And Satya, one of the great cricket players, and his wife is a pediatrician, so his foundation and mine are working, Sachin and I are working together. So just for fun, we did a video where I was kind of playing tennis with a tennis racket and he was hitting the ball with a cricket bat. So it's a bit bizarre, but people got a kick out of it.
So before we run out of time, I took a lot I took a lot away from reading your book. Probably, a lot of the people in this call have already read it. A memoir is in some ways for oneself, to sort of get understanding and put things in order, but it's, you obviously want readers to take something away. So what would you like readers to take away from your origin story?
Well, hopefully a sense of optimism that, human skill does, great things. And, it's kind of an American story where, my dad came from pretty humble beginnings, and, set an example for me, and provided me with, my mom, this great education. So I think it's a testament to that period of kids who grew up in the 50s and 60s, even though, the 60s seemed so tumultuous, young versus old, Vietnam, hippies, all that stuff, even, political assassinations. What came out of that was a sense of inquiry and learning, and that, science and engineering could take us forward. And, I got to be at the center of the field that did the most in that. So, that you can parent a kid who's quirky and strange, and that it can work out incredibly well. And, my sense of gratitude for all of that.
And on the topic of optimism, look, this country is very divided, but I certainly have a lot of friends who say they are sort of in a perpetual state of pessimism right now. The things that they believed in are suddenly at risk or have been halted. We talked about, some of your life's work that is under threat. Do you have a feeling, that we're resilient? There's cycles. The 60s was tough, but we're okay. Is it inevitable that things will be okay, or do you feel like everything's perpetually at stake?
Well, I'd say people should not doubt that this is the best time to be alive, to be born ever in human history. The work going on with obesity and Alzheimer's and polio eradication and, cutting childhood deaths in half again, all of that can be achieved. And despite all this turmoil, wars, politics, I don't see any of that. You can slow it down a little bit, but, we will solve obesity. We will, get people to recommit to polio eradication. And yes, it's great that we're worried about these looming problems, whether that's climate, bioterrorism, AI, superpowers, nuclear war, political polarization. That's, I'd say my list of 5 that you can get very worried about. Humans are good at that, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact of the progress we've made, whether it's on, lifespan, or, eliminating deaths, or treatment of women. We're very imperfect, but, we're by far the best we've been. And, yes, some research things are being disrupted right now, but that research is going to give us, incredible answers. And if we shape AI the right way, you can think very optimistically.
So, Bill, thank you for this. The book is really fascinating. And Barbara, let me hand it back to you.
Well, thank you both for your time, and what an insightful conversation. And it's great to end on an upbeat note. We like that as well, and thank you for it. So I want to just share real quickly, we have a few upcoming events. Looking ahead to April, we have a month full of speakers. Mohammed El-Arian, the president of Queen's College, Cambridge, will be in a conversation April 1st with our vice chair, Dambisa Moyo. April 3rd, Fidji Simo, the CEO of Instacart, will be in conversation with Marie-José Kravis. April 7th, Larry Fink of BlackRock will join us in a conversation with Bloomberg's Eric Chatzer. Austin Goolsbee joins us April the 10th, the head of the Chicago Fed, and Darren Ajimojo, the Nobel laureate and professor at MIT, April 15th in conversation with board member Greg Mankiw. And we'll close out the month, April 22nd, with Dan Loeb, the founder and CEO of Third Point. So we encourage you to mark your calendars, join us for these exceptional programs. And as always, before we close, I want to recognize those attending from the nearly 400 Centennial Society members whose generous contributions continue to provide vital support to the work that we do at the club. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you again, Bill and Addie, and we look forward to seeing both of you in the future and everyone on this call joining us as we go into April. Thank you.